The black ship drifted above Carthax, 9 like a corpse refusing burial. Its engines were cold, its exterior lights had long since failed. Yet it remained in stable orbit above the breach storms, suspended over the dead moon while tides of pale warp lightning crawled endlessly across the void beneath it. According to Imperial telemetry, the vessel had vanished 3 months earlier during sanctioned transit through the Carthax corridor. According to every law governing survival in the Imperium, nothing aboard should have remained alive after its Geller field collapsed. I believed that, until we entered the ship. My name is Interrogator Malak Vair of the Ordo Malleus. Inquisitor Seraphine granted me command of the recovery detail after the distress beacons resurfaced from the storm region near Carthax. 9. We expected infestation. We expected demonic manifestation, madness, ritual sacrifice, perhaps even full structural corruption. What we found instead was silence. The docking bay doors opened only after repeated plasma cutting. Frost rolled from the interior passages in thick white curtains despite functioning atmospheric systems. My stormtroopers advanced in disciplined formation through the dark, hellguns raised, boots echoing across metal decks lined with devotional seals. No bodies waited for us. No signs of combat scarred the corridors. Even the machine spirits seemed absent. The ship felt abandoned in a way I had never encountered before, as though its crew had not died, but simply ceased occupying reality. Then Trooper Hale found the first astropath. The corpse was fused into the wall beside a Vox relay station nearly 2 decks below the docking bay. Flesh and metal had merged together seamlessly. Veins spread through circuitry like roots beneath water. The dead. Psyche's eyes remained open, though both sockets contained strips of rolled parchment instead of pupils. Worse still, his mouth had been forced wide around a thick bundle of paper covered in symbols no one present recognized. Medicae scans revealed no trauma, no signs of possession, no warp mutation, only integration. I ordered the parchment burned immediately. The flame extinguished the moment it touched the script. That was the first moment genuine unease entered my thoughts. We continued descending through the vessel while intermittent Vox interference pulsed through our helmet receivers. At first, the disruptions resembled standard static bleed from nearby warp turbulence. Then the static began, forming patterns. Repeated knocks. Rhythmic pulses. 9 beats followed by silence. Magos Lex Mechanic Thol attempted translation through his cranial augers. The results caused one of his servo skulls to crash directly into a bulkhead hard enough to shatter its optics. Signal structure impossible, he whispered through Binharic distortion. Source resembles language recursion. I demanded clarification. He did not answer. Hours passed as we advanced deeper into the ship. The environmental systems continued functioning normally despite the overwhelming cold. Frost-coated prayer icons. Condensation dripped upward toward the ceiling. Every clock aboard the vessel displayed different times. My troopers began reporting shadows moving behind sealed blast doors, though Auspex readings remained empty. Then we reached the archive sanctum. The chamber stood behind 3 layers of hexagrammic wards etched directly into the hull. 27 purity seals covered the entrance. Several had been torn apart from the inside. No Imperial record mentioned the room's existence. The door opened only after Magos Thul bypassed obsolete Martian lock protocols older than the current Imperium itself. Inside waited a circular chamber lined with black stone that absorbed lumen light completely. Candles still burned around the perimeter despite lacking fuel sources. At the center stood a chained pedestal surrounded by concentric silver markings carved into the floor. Upon the pedestal rested a book. Even now, I struggle to describe it accurately. The cover appeared stitched from dark leather stretched over something soft and moving beneath. Metal clasps shaped like skeletal fingers held the volume shut. Strange symbols crawled slowly across its surface whenever viewed, indirectly. Looking at the thing too long produced pressure behind the eyes and a faint sensation of falling. Trooper Vanis vomited instantly after approaching within 3 meters. The smell inside the chamber reminded me of rain striking old graves. Magos Thul activated a servo arm scanner over the artifact. Every diagnostic rune across his console turned black simultaneously. One by one, his attached cherub servitors began reciting fragments of forgotten liturgies in voices that did not belong to them. Then the nearest servitor tore its own face off. Not violently, methodically, as though following instructions. The skin fell away in neat strips while the machine continued chanting through exposed teeth and metal. My troopers destroyed it with disciplined bursts, but the sound did not stop immediately. The voice continued from the severed head lying across the floor. I should have ordered immediate extermination procedures. Instead, I stepped closer. The book radiated warp presence stronger than any demon host I had encountered, yet the atmosphere around it felt strangely empty, hollow, like standing beside a wound after infection had already drained away. Even the usual psychic pressure associated with corruption seemed absent. That was when astropath Lyra's screamed over the vox from our transport vessel. "There are things outside the hull," he cried. "They are leaving." At first I thought fear had broken him. Then every sensor aboard our shuttle detected the same impossible phenomenon. Warp entities were withdrawing from the black ship's vicinity. Shapes previously circling through, nearby storm currents fled outward into deeper void regions. Demons were retreating. Magos Thol stared at the chain tome with widening optical lenses. "Impossible," he whispered. The chamber lights died. Every lumen aboard the ship extinguished at once. Darkness swallowed the archive sanctum completely, followed seconds later by a single transmission crackling through the Vox network from the vessel's bridge. The voice belonged to Captain Ursus, though official records confirmed his death months earlier. It has started reading us back. Then footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the sealed chamber doors. Slow, measured. Approaching through corridors, our Auspex scanners insisted were empty. None of us moved toward the doorway. The footsteps stopped outside the archive sanctum. No further sound followed. No breathing, no movement across Auspex returns. Yet every trooper in the chamber remained frozen with weapons trained toward the sealed entrance while frost thickened steadily across the black stone floor. I remember hearing the faint crackle of ice spreading beneath my boots and realizing the temperature had dropped enough for my breath to fog inside fully sealed carapace armor. Then the chained book moved. Not far. Barely a twitch beneath the iron restraints. But the motion rippled through the chamber like a pulse through exposed nerves. One of the candles surrounding the pedestal extinguished immediately afterward. Another followed seconds later. "Containment casket," I ordered. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Stormtroopers advanced cautiously while Magos Thul directed servo arms toward the pedestal. The machine's spirits resisted every command. Warning glyphs rolled endlessly across his cranial display as though the systems could not settle upon a stable diagnosis. When the restraints finally disengaged, the book emitted a sound unlike anything I had encountered before. A sigh. Not from lungs. From pages. The nearest trooper recoiled instinctively. For an instant I thought I saw the cover flex inward as if reacting to fear itself. Then the chamber doors behind us groaned open without authorization. The corridor beyond stood empty. No footprints marked the frost coating the deck plates. No life signs registered. Yet the cold flowing into the sanctum intensified sharply, carrying with it the stale scent of incense and rainwater. Somewhere far down the passage came the slow rhythmic knock we had heard earlier. 9 beats. Silence. 9 beats again. I ordered immediate extraction. The recovery team sealed the tome inside a triple-layered stasis casket lined with hexagrammic wards before retreating toward the docking bay. None of us spoke during the ascent through the dead ship. The silence aboard the vessel no longer felt abandoned. It felt attentive. Twice we passed crew quarters where shadows shifted behind the frosted viewports despite every chamber remaining vacuum-sealed from the outside. Trooper Hale claimed he heard whispering through the walls reciting his childhood catechisms in his mother's voice. I prepared disciplinary correction for fear-induced instability until 3 other troopers reported hearing the same phenomenon simultaneously. The whispers stopped the moment we reached the shuttle. Our return to the inquisitorial cruiser Penance of Dawn should have restored operational normalcy. Instead, the anomalies followed us aboard like spores carried from a plague world. At first the changes appeared minor. Ship chronometers began drifting out of synchronization by several minutes every hour despite repeated calibration. Condensation formed along interior bulkheads even within heated sectors. Incense smoke inside the primary chapel drifted downward instead of upward during evening rites. Crew members stationed on lower maintenance decks reported hearing distant page-turning noises echoing through ventilation shafts. By the second cycle after retrieval, the whispers had spread. One engineer claimed his deceased brother spoke to him through an inactive Vox terminal. A gunnery officer heard children laughing inside a sealed ammunition vault where no organic personnel had entered for years. The voices never repeated the same phrases twice. They sounded conversational, familiar, patient. Magos Thule established a quarantine laboratory within the cruiser's restricted archive vaults and began attempting translation analysis upon the tome. I attended the first examination personally, alongside 2 sanctioned psychers and 6 combat servitors. The moment the casket opened, every lumen globe in the chamber dimmed. The book rested motionless upon the steel examination altar while servo skulls circled overhead, projecting scanning beams across its surface. Symbols crawled slowly along the cover whenever viewed through peripheral vision. Direct observation revealed nothing except dark leather and metal clasps. Commencing lexical extraction, Thule announced. Mechanical tendrils lowered data probes toward the pages. The instant contact occurred, every connected monitor filled with spiraling script, unlike any known Imperial language. The symbols rotated continuously, folding inward across themselves like living geometry. One sanctioned psycho began bleeding from the eyes. The other started laughing softly beneath her breath. Thule attempted immediate data transfer into a hardened cogitator core. The stored information rewrote itself before our eyes. Gothic characters melted into impossible circles and branching lines that no longer resembled language at all. Machine memory instability increasing, the Magos warned. Then one of the servitors turned toward us. Its facial flesh had split apart around the jaw hinges. Black fluid dripped from its teeth while distorted vox static crackled through its speakers. "It remembers oceans," the servitor whispered. The chamber alarms activated instantly. I drew my bolt pistol and destroyed the construct with a single round through the cranial housing, but the damage spread too quickly. Adjacent cogitator screens began displaying the same phrase repeatedly in flickering crimson text. "It remembers oceans." The words vanished seconds later. No record remained within the system archives. We sealed the vault immediately afterward, yet the atmosphere aboard the cruiser continued deteriorating over subsequent hours. Entire corridors seemed subtly longer than before. Doorways occasionally opened onto incorrect chambers. Crew patrols reported sudden temperature drops severe enough to freeze exposed skin within seconds before conditions normalized again. Then Patrol Sigma vanished. Lieutenant Garin led 6 armed troopers through Corridor Theta, 1-9 during routine security sweeps near the lower cargo decks. Vox contact ceased abruptly midway through transmission. Response teams arrived less than 4 minutes later. They found no bodies, no blood, no weaponry. Only 7 pairs of boots arranged neatly along the corridor floor in perfect prayer formation facing a steel bulkhead that should not have contained a door. But it did now. Warm desert wind flowed through the opening from darkness beyond. Something moved far beyond the threshold. Not footsteps this time. A slow, dragging sound, accompanied by the faint toll of unseen bells somewhere beneath the wind. Trooper Hale raised his hellgun toward the darkness, hands trembling inside his gloves. Then our Auspex units detected structural dimensions beyond the doorway that exceeded the cruiser itself entirely inwardly now. The doorway should not have existed. I repeated that fact to myself, while standing before the steel bulkhead deep within Corridor Theta, 1-9, watching warm wind pour from an opening impossible for the cruiser's internal structure to contain. My Auspex displayed conflicting measurements every few seconds. One reading estimated a chamber less than 20 meters beyond the threshold. Another suggested an interior depth extending hundreds of kilometers beneath the vessel. The drifting air smelled of ancient dust and distant storms. No one volunteered to enter first. Lieutenant Garen's missing patrol remained unaccounted for. Their boots still faced the opening in rigid prayer formation, as if the troopers had removed them willingly before crossing into the darkness. Frost covered the leather despite the heat radiating from beyond the threshold. "Maintain Vox tethering," I ordered quietly. "No separation under any circumstances." My stormtroopers acknowledged with disciplined clicks over squad comms, though fear had already entered their voices. Even through sealed helmets I could hear breathing patterns becoming irregular. The corridor lights behind us flickered weakly, as though reluctant to illuminate the opening. Further, Magos Thol advanced beside me with metrodendrites extended protectively around his torso. Binary prayers crackled softly through his damaged Vox grill, while servo skulls drifted overhead, projecting lumen beams into the FAF. Darkness ahead. The light vanished after several meters. Not faded, consumed. We crossed the threshold together. The temperature changed immediately. The cold pressure saturating the cruiser disappeared, replaced by dry heat carrying grains of black dust across smooth stone beneath our boots. Gravity shifted subtly. I felt my weight redistribute unevenly through my limbs for several seconds before stabilizing again. Then the corridor behind us was gone. In its place stretched an immense subterranean landscape illuminated by pale drifting lights suspended high above like dying stars. Towering shelves carved from dark stone rose endlessly into the darkness overhead, packed with books, scrolls, tablets, and objects I could not properly identify from a distance. Bridges crossed impossible gaps between colossal aisles. Stairways spiraled downward beyond sight. There was no ceiling, only darkness filled with moving specks of dim silver light. Trooper Hale whispered a prayer to the Emperor beneath his breath. The sound echoed for far too long. My first rational thought was that we had entered some form of warp illusion generated through psychic contamination. Yet the environment lacked the instability typical of demon realms. Nothing writhed. Nothing screamed. The architecture possessed horrifying consistency. That frightened me more. Dust drifted upward instead of downward. Small stones occasionally rolled sideways across the floor against gravity entirely. Somewhere deep within the endless archive came the soft rustling sound of pages turning in unison. Magos Thul activated environmental scanners again. The machine spirits produced streams of corrupted readings before finally settling upon one impossible conclusion. Interior mass exceeds external vessel dimensions by factor incalculable, he said quietly. Even his mechanical voice sounded uncertain now. We advanced carefully between towering shelves lined with ancient volumes bound in materials I did not wish to identify too closely. Some resembled leather. Others appeared metallic, their surfaces engraved with moving symbols that shifted whenever viewed directly. A few shelves contained human skulls arranged upright, like records waiting cataloging. Several skulls whispered as we passed. One called my name. I ignored it. The deeper we moved into the archive, the more the environment resisted normal perception. Distances changed unpredictably. A staircase visible ahead sometimes took minutes to reach, while distant chambers suddenly appeared only steps away. At one point, Trooper Vanis swore he saw a formation of armored soldiers standing silently between the shelves before realizing they were statues carved from stacked books. Or perhaps the opposite. Then we found Garen. He sat upright against a stone pillar surrounded by scattered parchment. At first glance he appeared unharmed. His armor remained intact. His weapon rested calmly across his lap. But his breathing came in wet, irregular bursts, and his eyes no longer focused properly. "Lieutenant," I said carefully. "Report." His mouth opened slowly. "The shelves are deeper at night," he whispered. Blood leaked from his nose. Two troopers moved to assist him before freezing abruptly. I followed their gaze downward toward Garen's exposed hands. His fingers had fused together, not melted, folded. The flesh bent inward along impossible geometric angles resembling layered parchment compressed into triangular patterns beneath the skin. Vines pulsed visibly through the warped tissue. Similar distortions spread slowly up both arms beneath the armor plating. Yet Garen showed no signs of pain. He simply stared upward toward the darkness above the shelves. "They keep writing," he murmured. "Even when nobody reads." Before anyone could respond, A low vibration rolled through the archive floor beneath our boots. Dust lifted upward in spiraling streams. Somewhere far away, a bell began tolling softly. One strike, then another. The sound carried impossible depth, echoing through the endless shelves like something vast shifting in sleep. Magosthal suddenly staggered backward as streams of corrupted Benharik flooded his optical implants. I caught fragments of translated text spilling from his vox grill in broken monotone. The warp dreams because something deeper is sleeping. The phrase repeated again and again. Trooper Hale began screaming. We turned toward him instantly. He had removed his helmet without authorization and now clawed desperately at his own face while staring into one of the nearby shelves. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach tighten. The books were moving, not physically. Their pages fluttered open one by one as though stirred by unseen wind. Within them flashed images too brief to fully process. Burning cities beneath unfamiliar stars. Armored figures drowning inside oceans of black ink. Colossal shapes drifting beneath impossible skies. Hale collapsed to his knees, sobbing violently. I saw terror burning, he gasped. I saw the throne empty. I ordered sedation immediately. Before the Medicaid trooper could comply, another sound emerged from deeper within the archive. Slow footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Shapes moved far between the shelves. Tall figures robed in pale material drifting silently through the aisles while carrying lanterns that emitted darkness instead of light. Their limbs appeared too long, their movements too smooth. One paused briefly beside a distant shelf before turning what might have been its head toward us. I felt sudden pressure behind my eyes. The figure resumed walking. None of us spoke while the procession disappeared into the deeper archive. Even the whispers surrounding the shelves seemed to retreat in their presence. Then Garen laughed softly from the floor. We looked down. Blood poured steadily from his mouth now, but he no longer seemed aware of it. His warped hands trembled weakly across the stone while he stared upward into the endless dark beyond the shelves. They know we entered, he whispered. The bells began ringing louder, and across the endless archive around us, thousands of books slowly opened at once. The sound of the bells spread through the archive like pressure moving beneath deep water. Every open book around us began turning pages on its own, not randomly, rhythmically. Thousands of fluttering sheets moved in synchronized waves across the endless shelves while dust spiraled upward through the dim air. The noise resembled distant rainfall mixed with whispering voices. Then the whispers became understandable. Fragments reached us from every direction. Names, prayers, coordinates, half-finished confessions spoken in voices belonging to strangers and dead companions alike. Trooper Hale fell to his knees, clutching his ears hard enough to split the skin beneath his gloves. Garen continued laughing softly against the pillar while blood seeped steadily from his warped mouth. The geometric distortions, spreading through his arms, had reached the neck seals of his armor now, shifting visibly beneath the flesh like folded paper pressing outward from within. Movement, one trooper barked suddenly. The robed figures had returned. They drifted soundlessly through the aisles ahead, taller than any human, their elongated bodies wrapped in layered pale material resembling ancient parchment soaked in old wax. No visible faces emerged beneath the hanging folds around their heads. Each carried a lantern suspended from thin black chains. The lanterns emitted darkness, not shadow, actual absence. Where the black glow touched surrounding shelves, all visible detail vanished into smooth emptiness before slowly returning seconds later. The procession ignored us initially. 6 figures crossed the distant archive floor in slow, synchronized motion while the bells continued tolling overhead. 1 strike every several seconds. 9 total. Then silence. The moment the 9th bell sounded, agony tore through every Vox unit attached to our armor systems. Static erupted violently across communications channels accompanied by overlapping screams from aboard the Penance of Dawn. Astropaths burning. Containment breach lower sanctum. Emperor preserve us, they are inside the walls. The transmission dissolved into distortion. Magos Thul convulsed beside me as corrupted Benharik flooded through his augmetic nervous system. Servo skulls crashed from the air around him one after another, their optics leaking black fluid before shutting down completely. I attempted immediate contact with the cruiser. No response. Only breathing echoed faintly through the Vox network now. Slow. Wet. Not human. The bells rang again. This time the archive reacted. Entire shelves shifted position across the distant darkness with grinding stone vibrations beneath our feet. Stairways folded inward. Bridges realigned themselves between impossible gaps. The environment was changing. Architecture around us, deliberately. One of the robed custodians stopped moving. It turned toward Trooper Vanis. No face existed beneath the hooded folds. Only darkness. Yet Vanis staggered backward instantly as though struck physically. His hellgun slipped from nerveless fingers and clattered across the stone floor. "What is your designation?" I demanded. The custodian remained silent. Vanis began trembling violently. "My face," he whispered. He touched his helmet repeatedly with confused desperation. "I cannot remember my face." Panic spread through his breathing. He ripped off his helmet and stared at the polished reflection across its visor. Terror consumed him instantly. "I cannot remember," he screamed. He clawed at his own features hard enough to tear flesh from his cheeks. Blood splashed across the stone while nearby troopers restrained him unsuccessfully. The custodian simply turned away and resumed walking through the aisles, as though nothing had occurred. Within seconds, Vanis no longer recognized his own name. I ordered sedation. The injector entered his neck. Nothing changed. He continued mutilating himself while sobbing like a child lost in darkness. Magos Thol watched the departing figures with visible mechanical tremors running through his augmetic limbs. "Conceptual predation," he whispered. "Not biological assault. It removes structures from cognition itself." Another bell strike echoed overhead. This time, the archive lights dimmed sharply. Far above the shelves, drifting silver stars blinked out one by one, until entire sections of the vast darkness vanished into blackness. I noticed movement there briefly, massive shapes crossing slowly behind the remaining lights, too large for accurate scale. Then they were gone. We abandoned attempts to stabilize Garen and Vanis after both subjects lost coherent awareness entirely. Their muttering blended together continuously now, repeating fragments of the same phrase over and over beneath blood-flecked breaths. "The warp dreams because something deeper is sleeping." I ordered the team forward. Remaining stationary inside the archive felt increasingly dangerous. Every second spent listening to the bells worsened the pressure building behind my eyes. Thoughts occasionally slipped sideways without warning. I would begin issuing commands only to realize halfway through the sentence that I no longer remembered the original intention. The shelves surrounding us became stranger the deeper we traveled. Some held books bound in metallic skin engraved with shifting constellations. Others contained rows of transparent cylinders filled with floating human eyes suspended in dark fluid. Entire aisles appeared dedicated to objects, impossible to classify through sane logic. Preserved shadows hanging from hooks, jars containing whispered conversations, skeletal remains carved into mathematical patterns. At one junction we discovered an enormous mural etched into black stone. It depicted civilizations kneeling before a vast circular void suspended above them. Eldar forms appeared among the kneeling masses. So did humans. Other species I could not identify surrounded the same darkness in ritual posture, while streams of symbols flowed downward from the void like rain. Beneath the mural, written in countless overlapping languages, repeated one translated sentence: "All memory returns below." Magos Thul stopped abruptly beside the wall. Data scrolls extended from his mechadendrites while optical lenses narrowed toward a specific cluster of symbols near the base. "Translation emerging," he announced mechanically. His voice sounded strained. The surrounding bells ceased instantly. Silence spread through the archive. Then Thul spoke. "Chaos is merely the fever," he translated quietly. "This is the patient." The floor lurched beneath us. A deep vibration rolled through the shelves like distant continental movement. Stone cracked somewhere far below while entire aisles began descending slowly into darkness. Dust rose upward in massive spirals as bridges folded, inward toward deeper unseen levels. The archive itself was sinking. No, descending. The realization hit moments later as distant shelves vanished downward beyond sight. Whatever mechanism governed this impossible place had responded directly to the translation. Trooper Hale stared into the widening darkness beneath the descending aisles with widening eyes. "Interrogator," he whispered shakily. I followed his gaze. Far below the moving shelves, beyond layers of descending bridges and drifting dust, faint lights had appeared in the depths. Not stars. Eyes. Hundreds of them opening slowly beneath the archive while the bells prepared to ring again. The eyes beneath the archive did not blink. They opened wider instead, revealing concentric layers of pale light beneath the sinking shelves. As the structure continued its slow descent, the distant darkness resolved into something worse than space. It was organized, ordered, like a vast inverted cathedral waiting beneath the library floor. Then the bells rang again. This time the sound came from everywhere at once. Not above us, not below us, but within the shelves themselves, as if every book had become a bell struck by invisible hands. The resonance passed through bone and armor alike, forcing all of us to stagger. Trooper Hale collapsed completely, whispering incoherent fragments while pressing his forehead against the stone. The archive responded to the ninth resonance immediately. The shelves stopped sinking. For a single breath of time, everything froze in place. Then the walls began to bleed. Not metaphorically, not psychically, physically. Black ink seeped from the stone seams between shelves, flowing downward in thick viscous streams that carried the scent of old iron and wet parchment. The fluid moved with intention, tracing lines across the floor in geometric patterns that mirrored the mural we had discovered earlier. Magos Thul stepped backward slowly. "This is not storage," he said in a strained Binharic whisper. "This is production." The ink thickened rapidly, rising from the floor in layered sheets that began forming structures around us. At first they resembled scaffolding, then ribs, then archways, then entire walls. Something was being built around us using written material. The first scream came from Trooper Vanis. He had not been fully stabilized. His mind had already begun fragmenting under prior exposure. Now he stared at the forming structures around his feet as the ink rose to meet his boots. "It is writing through us," he screamed. The ink reached his legs. Where it touched flesh, skin did not dissolve. It translated. His lower body folded into layered segments of script, each strip of muscle and bone rearranging into compressed glyphs that pulsed faintly with wet light. He fell forward, but no impact followed. His torso simply continued rewriting itself mid-fall. There was no death, only revision. The others opened fire instinctively. Lasbolts burned through the forming structures, but the damage closed immediately, text repairing itself faster than we could destroy it. Every impact created more symbols rather than less. Magos Thul attempted emergency null field deployment. The device activated for less than 3 seconds before collapsing inward, overwritten by the surrounding script. Even the machine spirits could not maintain consistency within the chamber. The walls completed their transformation. We stood inside a vast organic cathedral made entirely of living text. Rows upon rows of fused parchment flesh extended upward into darkness beyond sight. Between them hung suspended figures embedded into the structure itself. Some still moved weakly. Others had already become static pages. Then I recognized one. Garen. His body had been stretched across a vertical column of script. His face remained partially intact, eyes still conscious, but no longer aligned properly with his skull. The geometric folding in his arms had expanded into his chest, turning rib structure into layered inscriptions. Yet he was not dead. He was being recorded. "Interrogator," he whispered faintly. "Do not read it aloud." Before I could respond, a new sound emerged from the depths of the scriptoria. Writing. Not scratching, not carving. Writing in motion. Thousands of unseen forces moving simultaneously across the flesh walls, inscribing continuous streams of text directly into reality. The ink pulsed with rhythmic intelligence, reacting to our presence as if adjusting its composition based on observation. Magos Thul's voice broke slightly. "These are not books," he said. "These are recording organs." The phrase triggered something. The entire chamber reacted instantly. The ink surged upward from the floor in violent waves. The suspended bodies embedded within the walls convulsed as writing intensified across their forms. Garen screamed once before his mouth filled completely with moving script. Then the walls spoke. Not through sound, through understanding. Every symbol across the chamber translated simultaneously into cognition. We were inside a system that recorded existence by rewriting it into itself. The realization fractured coherence across the squad instantly. 2 troopers dropped their weapons and began whispering prayers backwards while scratching symbols into their armor plates. Another simply walked forward into the D wall and was absorbed without resistance. No impact, no resistance, just inclusion. I ordered full retreat. The command meant nothing here. The passage behind us had already been overwritten. Where the corridor once existed now stood another segment of flesh scriptoria extending infinitely in both directions. Every path had become part of the same structure. Magos Thul turned slowly toward me. "There is no exit function," he said. "Only continuation states." Then he raised his mechadendrites toward his own skull. Before I could stop him, he severed his primary cognitive interface. For a moment I thought he had chosen death. Instead, he spoke clearer than before. "The system requires recursion," he said calmly. "It is not observing us, it is iterating us." His remaining servo skulls began circling rapidly, projecting fragmented calculations into the air. The patterns revealed something horrifying. Every action we had taken since entering the archive had already been recorded in earlier layers of text embedded within the walls. Our presence was not discovery. It was compliance. The chamber trembled again. Far beneath the scriptoria, something larger shifted. A sound echoed upward through the walls like distant thunder translated into language. Then Garen opened his eyes fully for the last time. "They are finishing the page," he whispered. And the writing across the walls began to update in real time. The writing did not stop when Garen died. It accelerated. His final whisper had barely left his mouth before every surface around us updated in response. The flesh scriptoria responded like a living system correcting an error state. Garen's body, still embedded in the vertical column of text, was slowly rewritten into something flatter, more uniform. His face smoothed into layers of shifting script until even the memory of his expression could no longer stabilize. Magos Thul stepped back instinctively. "This is correction behavior," he said. "Not death, not transformation, correction." The chamber lights, if they could still be called that, dimmed into a deep amber glow. The ink running through the walls slowed its motion for the first time since entering the scriptoria. The change felt deliberate, as if something deeper had turned its attention toward us. Then the walls stopped writing. Silence fell. Not the absence of sound, the absence of update. Even the surviving troopers hesitated, frozen in place as if reality itself had paused mid-process. For a brief, unbearable moment, I felt something like relief. That feeling ended when the voice spoke behind us. It did not echo. It arrived fully formed in the space between thoughts. "You are not the first to misread the archive." We turned together. Standing at the edge of the shifting scriptoria floor was a figure that should not have survived within any known Imperial classification. It wore no armor, no insignia, only ragged layers of what looked like ecclesiarchal vestments stripped of all color, hanging from a frame too thin to be fully human. But it was the eyes that stopped us. Or rather, the absence of them. Where eyes should have been, there were hollow cavities filled with drifting particulate light, as if starlight had been poured into empty sockets and left to collapse inward endlessly. Trooper Hale dropped his weapon immediately. "Saint," he whispered without understanding why. The figure tilted its head slightly. "I am no saint," it replied. "Saints require belief. I require observation." Magos Thul activated scanning protocols instantly. Every augmetic lens across his body attempted analysis simultaneously. The readings failed before they stabilized. "No biometric consistency," he muttered. "No temporal anchoring. This entity exists outside structural continuity." The hollow-eyed figure stepped forward onto the script-formed floor. The ink beneath its feet did not react. That alone was more terrifying than anything we had seen. The figure extended one hand slowly, as if indicating the surrounding walls. "You are inside a transcription engine," it said. "It has been running since before your species learned to write fire into stone." I raised my bolt pistol, though I did not fully understand why. "Identify yourself," I ordered. The figure did not react to the weapon. "I am what remains when the archive forgets how to end a sentence," it said calmly. "You may call me the last index." The walls behind it resumed faint movement, but now more controlled. Less chaotic, more deliberate. The ink patterns shifted away from organic writing into structured geometry, forming repeating sequences that resembled logic systems rather than language. Magos Thul whispered rapidly into his Vox grill. "It is interfacing with the substrate," he said. "It is. Negotiating structure." The last index turned slightly toward him. "No," it corrected. "I am correcting entropy drift caused by your intrusion." The chamber vibrated softly. Far beneath the scriptoria, something vast responded again. The sensation was not physical. It was interpretive, as if something below us was adjusting how it understood our existence. The hollow-eyed figure continued speaking. "The archive beneath your vessel is not unique," it said. "It is a shallow instance, a projection layer, a bleed-through from deeper systems." I felt a tightening in my chest. "Deeper systems?" I asked. The last index nodded once. "Below this structure is another archive, and below that, another. Your reality is not at the top of the chain, it is somewhere in the middle." The words should have been impossible to process. Yet they settled into understanding too easily, as if my mind had always contained space for them. Magos Thul's voice broke slightly. "That violates cosmological law," he said. The figure tilted its head again. "Your laws describe local stability," it replied, "not total structure." A sudden shift passed through the chamber. The ink walls stopped moving again, but this time not in silence. They stopped as if waiting, as if listening to something deeper than speech. The last index turned toward the far end of the chamber where the scriptoria extended into darkness. "There is movement below," it said quietly, "and it is no longer passive." Trooper Hale began trembling violently. "I hear pages," he whispered, inside my head. The sound returned instantly. Not bells this time. Pages turning. Slow. Patient. Every surface in the chamber responded at once. The flesh text rippled in synchronized waves, as if responding to the same external signal. The geometry beneath us began shifting downward again. The archive was resuming descent. Magos Thul stepped closer to the hollow-eyed figure. "If you exist outside the system," he said carefully, "then you can remove us." The last index looked at him for a long moment. "I do not remove," it said. "I reclassify." The ink beneath Garen's remains completed its final update. His body was no longer present. Where he had been embedded in the wall, only clean, uninterrupted script remained, as if he had never existed. The realization struck the remaining troopers immediately. One began praying aloud, another attempted to fire his weapon into the floor. The bolt round dissolved before impact, absorbed by the script without reaction. The last index raised a hand slightly. "Violence is not indexed here," it said. "Only continuation." The chamber trembled again. From deep beneath the structure, something vast shifted closer. This time, the sound was not interpreted as bells or pages or voices. It was pressure, the sensation of being read from below. Magos Thul looked at me. For the first time, he said quietly, "The system is acknowledging external attention." The hollow-eyed figure turned toward us one final time. "You have reached a transitional layer," it said. "What comes next does not recognize you as observers." The ink on the walls began forming a new structure. A door. Not carved, written into existence. And beyond it, something vast began turning the page. The door written into the flesh scriptoria did not open. It unfolded. Lines of ink, separated from the surrounding walls as if pulled apart by invisible hands, forming a widening fracture of pure geometric absence. Beyond it was not another corridor or chamber, but a pressure difference in reality itself. Something on the other side was pushing outward, not attempting to enter, but attempting to escape. The hollow-eyed figure did not move. Magos Thul stepped closer to the threshold, augmetic systems overclocking as he attempted to stabilize environmental readings. Every display on his interface flickered violently between conflicting data states. "This is not warp signature," he whispered. "It is anti-warp displacement." Trooper Hale fell to his knees again, clutching his helmetless head. "They're screaming," he said. "They're all screaming backwards." At first I thought it was another hallucination, induced by the Scriptoria's influence. Then the screaming arrived through the structure itself, not from within the chamber, from everywhere beyond it. The ink walls around us shuddered violently, as if reacting to something approaching from the opposite direction. The written flesh that composed the archive began to ripple outward in concentric distortions. Symbols broke apart, mid-formation. Entire passages collapsed into unreadable noise, and then the first demonic entity appeared. It did not emerge through the door. It fell out of reality. A shape twisted from overlapping anatomy and impossible geometry dropped into the chamber, convulsing violently as it struck the ink-covered floor. Its form was unstable, constantly flickering between states of existence. Horns of fractured light dissolved and reformed, limbs inverted and reattached in incorrect configurations, but it was not attacking. It was retreating. The entity scrambled backward, dragging itself away from the doorway while emitting high-frequency vocalizations that did not translate into language but into pure panic. Magos Thul froze. "That is a warp entity," he said slowly. "And it is afraid." Another impact followed immediately. Then another. Then another. The chamber filled with collapsing demons, each one violently expelled from unseen regions beyond the door. Some disintegrated upon contact with the ink walls. Others tore at themselves in desperate attempts to escape further backward, as if fleeing something that pursued them from deeper still. Troopers opened fire instinctively. The bolter rounds passed through one entity without effect before vanishing entirely mid-air, rewritten out of causality by the surrounding script. The hollow-eyed figure finally moved. It stepped closer to the threshold. For the first time, I saw hesitation in its posture. "This is not sanctioned separation," it said quietly. A deeper sound emerged from beyond the door. Not a roar, not a voice, a correction. The fleeing demons reacted instantly. Several turned and attempted to force their way through the ink walls instead of the opening, tearing themselves apart in the process. One collapsed entirely into collapsing symbols that sank into the floor like burning text. Trooper Hale began laughing again. "Even they don't want to be here," he whispered. The ink beneath our feet began vibrating in rhythm with something unseen. The entire Scriptoria structure responded as if synchronizing with an external presence. Magos Thul staggered backward. "The system is re-evaluating threat hierarchy," he said. "We are no longer top-level observers." Another demon appeared at the threshold. This one was larger. Its form barely stabilized long enough to be perceived as a coherent entity before fracturing into multiple overlapping silhouettes. Its presence filled the chamber with psychic pressure so intense that two troopers collapsed. Instantly, armor seals rupturing outward from internal stress. But it did not advance. It recoiled. Then it screamed. The sound was not audible. It was conceptual. Every surface in the chamber cracked simultaneously. Ink ran upward along the walls in reverse flow. The written structures began dissolving into chaotic loops of unreadable recursion. And still, the entity retreated. "It is violating its own survival instinct," Magos Thul muttered in disbelief. "Something is overriding demon behavioral imperatives." The hollow-eyed figure turned slightly toward me. "This is what you brought aboard your vessel," it said. "A recursive observational kernel." I did not understand the term, but I understood the consequence. The doorway pulsed again, and something far beyond the fleeing demons moved closer. The pressure increased instantly. Every daemon in the chamber froze mid-motion. Then, one by one, they began to dissolve. Not violently, not destructively, simply, unwillingly. Their forms unraveled into collapsing script fragments that were absorbed back into the ink floor, as if the chamber itself refused to continue recording their existence. The remaining demons attempted final escape through any available surface, clawing at the walls, tearing into space itself, but every attempt failed. Reality no longer accepted their structure. They were being removed from the system. Not killed. Excluded. Magos Thul's voice became quieter. It is not fighting them, he said. It is correcting their classification. The hollow-eyed figure stepped back from the threshold. For the first time, it looked uncertain. This should not be capable of interaction at this layer, it said. The door of ink stabilized. Beyond it, the pressure intensified again. But now it was focused. Directed. Aware. The fleeing demons vanished completely in a single synchronized collapse event. Silence followed immediately afterward, deeper than anything we had yet experienced. Even the scriptoria stopped moving. Then, from beyond the threshold, something new arrived. Not an entity. A presence. And for the first time since entering the archive beneath the warp, the hollow-eyed figure spoke a single word that carried visible hesitation. Margin. The moment the hollow-eyed figure spoke the word margin, the ink doorway stopped behaving like a structure. It stopped behaving like anything built. It began behaving like something observed. The surface of the threshold flattened completely, becoming a perfect absence in the shape of understanding itself. No texture remained, no motion. Only a depthless plane where the idea of passage had been stripped of all interpretation. Then it opened. Not outward. Not inward. It inverted. Every symbol composing the ink door reversed direction simultaneously, folding through itself like a page being turned inside out across infinite dimensions. The sound that followed was not an explosion, but the sensation of meaning breaking alignment with reality. Magos Thul staggered backward immediately. Structural negation event, he said rapidly. It is rewriting the interface between contained and uncontained states. But his words sounded distant now. Muted. As if the chamber itself no longer prioritized interpretation through language. Trooper Hale collapsed again, this time not in fear, but in confusion. His voice came out fractured. I can see below it, he whispered. I can see under the archive. The hollow-eyed figure did not respond. It had stopped moving entirely. The ink doorway stabilized into a perfect vertical fracture suspended in space, and beyond it was no longer darkness. It was depth. A layered immensity of drifting black strata moving in slow vertical currents, as if entire oceans of reality were stacked beneath one another. Within those layers, faint structures drifted like submerged continents composed of geometry rather than matter. Then something blinked. Far below. Not an eye. An acknowledgement. The entire archive trembled. Every shelf, every wall of flesh script, every suspended structure responded with synchronized vibration. The ink beneath our feet began flowing upward again, reversing direction in response to whatever lay beneath the threshold. Magos Thul's optical systems overloaded briefly before stabilizing. The archive is receiving external gravitational semantics, he said. It is being pulled into interpretive alignment with something below it. The hollow-eyed figure finally moved again. Slowly. It stepped away from the threshold. This is not permitted expansion, it said quietly. The margin is not a level. Another vibration passed through the structure. Deeper this time. More deliberate. And the ink doorway widened further. From within the vertical fracture, shapes began to form. Not emerging, not entering, simply becoming visible through alignment. At first they resembled silhouettes. Then structures. Then impossible anatomical arrangements composed of layered geometry and broken symbolic mass. But nothing fully resolved. Each attempt to perceive them collapsed into partial understanding before stabilizing again at a slightly different configuration. The result was worse than incomprehension. It was instability of perception itself. Trooper Hale began shaking uncontrollably. They're looking back, he whispered. They're reading us from underneath. Magos Thul activated full augmetic shielding protocols. Containment integrity failing across all conceptual layers, he said. The system is no longer isolating external observation vectors. Then the ink beneath us shifted again. Not upward this time. Sideways. The entire scriptoria structure began rotating slowly, as if something beneath it had tilted its foundation. Shelves leaned at impossible angles. Suspended bodies embedded in the walls slid slightly within their textual bindings, not falling, but being re-indexed. The hollow-eyed figure turned toward me. This layer is collapsing into adjacency, it said. I forced myself to respond. Adjacency to what? It hesitated. Then answered. The margin is not below, it said. It is between. The ink doorway reacted instantly to the statement. It widened further, and something pressed through. Not a being. A condition. The first effect was silence. Complete. Absolute. Even thought became difficult to sustain as the chamber lost all reference for continuity. The flesh script around us stopped updating entirely, frozen mid-sentence as if unable to proceed under new structural rules. Then the light changed. Every faint illumination within the archive shifted into a uniform pale tone, flattening depth perception entirely. Distances collapsed. Spatial reasoning destabilized. Magos Thul staggered. We are being de-indexed, he said. Our positional references are dissolving. From beyond the threshold, the vertical depth stirred again. This time, multiple layers moved simultaneously. Something vast was attempting to surface across all interpretive planes at once. The hollow-eyed figure stepped forward once more, now directly facing the opening. For the first time, its voice carried strain. This should not respond to observation collapse, it said. The ink doorway began to fracture along its edges, and beneath it, the layered depths of the margin began opening further. Not as a portal, but as awareness. The moment the margin stopped behaving like a place, and began behaving like awareness, the entire structure of the flesh scriptoria failed to remain stable as architecture. It did not collapse. It recalculated. Every shelf, every wall, every suspended body embedded within the writing lattice reoriented itself in perfect synchrony. The ink that composed the chamber shifted from chaotic flow into precise geometric alignment, forming repeating radial patterns that expanded outward from the ink doorway, like a mathematical prayer being spoken through reality itself. Magos Thul froze mid-motion. This is not structural decay, he said slowly. This is optimization. The hollow-eyed figure did not move. It remained facing the threshold where the margin now pressed against existence, like a submerged intelligence testing the boundaries of its container. Then, the first pulse arrived. It was not sound. It was structure. Every surface in the chamber reorganized simultaneously into interlocking geometric sequences. Lines formed within the ink walls, intersecting at impossible angles that should have collapsed spatial reasoning entirely, yet instead produced a terrifying sense of clarity. For a moment, everything felt correctly arranged, as if reality itself had found its proper configuration. Trooper Hale collapsed immediately. I understand it, he whispered. I understand all of it. Blood ran from his nose as his eyes tracked invisible patterns across empty air. Magos Thul attempted emergency cognition shielding, but the systems failed to engage. His mechadendrites trembled uncontrollably as his augmetic logic engines attempted to resolve the incoming structure. Geometric compulsion field, he muttered. It is forcing interpretive symmetry. Then the ink doorway reacted again. The margin beyond it responded not with movement, but with resonance. A second pulse followed. This one carried intent. Every trooper still conscious dropped to their knees involuntarily as the chamber reconfigured itself into a vast circular formation. The flesh-script walls bent into layered arcs, converging toward a central point directly above the threshold. The geometry resembled a ritual diagram, but scaled beyond comprehension, extending across the entire archive structure. Even the hollow-eyed figure staggered slightly. This is not reactive containment, it said quietly. It is invocation. The word changed everything. The chamber responded instantly. The geometric structure tightened. The ink walls folded inward in synchronized layers, forming concentric rings that aligned perfectly with the margin's presence below. Each ring rotated independently, creating a vast multi-dimensional lattice that pulsed in rhythm with something deeper beneath existence. Magos Thul's voice cracked. It is synchronizing the archive with external cognition cycles, he said. We are inside a prayer construct. A third pulse struck. The effect was immediate and absolute. Every embedded body within the scriptoria, every partially rewritten trooper, every fused fragment of Garen, every corrupted form still lingering in the walls, lifted their heads in unison. They were no longer individuals. They were components. All of them spoke simultaneously. Not words, Ratios. The sound formed a harmonic structure that matched the geometric pattern now dominating the chamber. The entire archive had become a single organized invocation, directed downward toward the margin. Then the ink doorway stabilized again, but now it no longer resembled a fracture. It resembled an aperture, a controlled opening. Something within the margin responded immediately. The layered depths beneath the threshold shifted in synchronized response, as if acknowledging the completed structure above. Vast silhouettes moved through the lower strata, aligning themselves with the geometric lattice being formed in real space. Trooper Hale began laughing again, but this time without awareness. "It likes it," he whispered. "It likes the shape." Margos Thul stepped backward slowly. "We are not resisting anymore," he said. "We are participating." The hollow-eyed figure turned toward us. For the first time since its arrival, its voice carried urgency. "This geometry must not complete," it said. But the structure continued regardless. The chamber was now fully transformed into a vast circular configuration of interlocking ink and flesh script, rotating slowly around the ink doorway like a constructed eye opening toward the margin below. Then the fourth pulse arrived, and the geometry answered. Every ring of the structure locked into perfect alignment simultaneously. The archive stopped behaving as a system of containment and became instead a functioning interface. The margin responded instantly. Something massive began rising. Not through the doorway, through the alignment itself. Magos Thul's optical systems overloaded again. "It is not entering," he said in a strained voice. "It is matching frequency." The hollow-eyed figure stepped forward and placed a hand against the edge of the ink aperture. "This is not supplication," it said softly. "This is access." The geometry of the chamber reached completion, and beneath it, the margin opened in full recognition, not as a threat, but as a receiving structure. The moment the geometry completed itself, the archive stopped expanding outward and instead began folding inward, not collapsing, integrating. Every concentric ring formed during the geometry of prayer tightened until the entire structure resembled a single layered thought compressed into physical space. The ink doorway at the center no longer appeared as an opening or a fracture. It had become an eye-shaped convergence point through which the margin observed us observing it. Then the walls began to breathe, slowly at first, then in synchronized rhythm. The flesh scriptoria surface expanded and contracted like lungs made of written material. Each inhale drew in fragments of scattered ink light from the surrounding geometry. Each exhale released faint echoes of rewritten sound. Magos Thul staggered slightly. "The system is stabilizing into recursive occupancy," he said. "It is now hosting something within itself." Trooper Hale was no longer reacting to fear in a conventional sense. His expressions had become detached, as if emotional response was lagging behind cognition. He stared at the nearest wall where the embedded script had begun forming subtle vertical pathways. "I can see them," he whispered. No one immediately responded. Then we saw it too. The figures were not emerging from the walls. They were already inside them. At first, they appeared as faint distortions beneath the shifting text, like silhouettes trapped behind layers of ink and parchment. Then they gained definition. Humanoid shapes moving slowly within the structure itself, walking along pathways formed between lines of script as if the walls had become corridors. Pilgrims. Dozens. Then hundreds. They moved with deliberate slowness, each one carrying small flickering lights embedded within their chest cavities. The lights did not illuminate the surrounding script. Instead, they seemed to illuminate the pilgrims themselves from within, revealing partial outlines of bone, parchment, and fluid geometry beneath their skin. But none of them looked at us. They were not aware of us. Or perhaps we were not part of their reference layer. Magos Thul activated structural resonance scanning again, though his movements were increasingly unstable. "These entities are not external," he said. "They are sub-layer manifestations." Failed transcription stabilized within structural memory. The pilgrims continued walking through the walls, passing through intersecting layers of ink script without resistance. Their movement suggested familiarity, as if the entire flesh structure was an inhabited environment to them. Then one of them stopped, directly opposite us. It turned its head slowly, and looked outward. For the first time, something inside the walls acknowledged the chamber. Trooper Hale immediately stepped back. The pilgrim's face was indistinct, formed from overlapping fragments of text and partial anatomical structure. Its mouth moved, but the sound that emerged was not spoken language. It was memory being retrieved incorrectly. "I remember being written incorrectly," it said. The walls around it flickered violently. Other pilgrims began stopping as well, one by one, all turning toward us. Magus Thul's voice tightened. "They are becoming aware of external observation," he said. "That should not be possible at this layer." The pilgrims began pressing closer to the interior surface of the walls, their forms distorting as they approached the boundary between internal and external structure. The ink script beneath them reacted instantly, attempting to stabilize their movement by rewriting surrounding pathways. But the pilgrims resisted. They spoke again, now in overlapping fragments. "We were supposed to be elsewhere. We were not indexed correctly. We are the correction that failed to resolve." The chamber temperature dropped sharply. The geometry established earlier began to destabilize. Lines across the walls warped unevenly as the pilgrims increased their pressure against the structural boundary. Then one of them pressed its hand directly against the inner surface of the flesh scriptoria wall. The ink did not resist. Instead, it softened. For a brief moment, I saw through the wall, and beyond it. Not another chamber, not another layer, but countless overlapping versions of the same archive, stacked in impossible repetition, each filled with slightly different arrangements of pilgrims walking through different configurations of the same structure. Magus Thul saw it too. His voice broke slightly. "It is multi-instance recursion," he said. "They are not inside one structure. They are inside all variations of it simultaneously." The pilgrims began pressing harder. The walls started to thin. Across the chamber, the ink doorway to the margin reacted immediately. Its shape destabilized as the surrounding system lost structural coherence. The hollow-eyed figure stepped forward again. "This must not merge," it said sharply. But the pilgrims did not stop. They began speaking in unison now. "Not to us, not to the chamber, to the structure itself. We are already here," they said. "You only failed to notice us." The walls fractured slightly, and for the first time, something from within the margin responded directly to them. A pulse traveled upward through the geometry, but it did not come as force. It came as recognition. The pilgrims froze. Every one of them. Even the movement within the walls stopped completely. Then the ink script beneath them rewrote itself instantly, and the pilgrims began stepping out of the walls. The pilgrims did not emerge from the walls the way anything living should emerge. They unfolded. Their bodies separated from the flesh scriptoria in layered fragments of text and bone-like geometry, each step outward rewriting the boundary that had once contained them. The ink reacted immediately, attempting to restabilize the breach, but the pilgrims no longer behaved as contained anomalies. They behaved as corrections being finalized. Magus Thul stepped back instinctively. "This is not extraction," he said. "This is reintegration." The hollow-eyed figure remained motionless, watching the process unfold with a stillness that now felt less like control and more like uncertainty. Trooper Hale whispered something under his breath, but the words did not form correctly. His voice broke into fragments of partial memory before collapsing into silence. One pilgrim stepped fully into the chamber. Then another. They were no longer distorted silhouettes. Their forms had stabilized into coherent humanoid structure, though still composed of overlapping script, bone geometry, and internal light sources that pulsed in slow rhythmic cycles. They did not look at us. They looked through us, as if we were temporary annotations on a deeper page. Then the ink beneath our feet changed again. A section of the chamber floor detached itself from the surrounding scriptoria and rose upward, forming a flat surface like a reading platform. Upon it lay a single object that had not been present before. A book. Not the chained artifact. Not any known copy from the archive. This was different. Smaller. Simpler. Bound in dark material that resembled worn imperial parchment, but too clean in its construction to belong to any corrupted layer of the structure. No chains held it, no wards encircled it. Yet every pilgrim turned toward it instantly upon its appearance. Magus Thul froze. "This is not part of the system," he said slowly. "It is external insertion." The hollow-eyed figure stepped forward slightly. "No," it said quietly. "This is internal confirmation." The book opened on its own. No force touched it. No mechanism activated it. The pages simply turned, as if responding to an unseen reader whose presence filled the chamber more completely than any physical object. At first the pages were blank. Then text began forming. Not written, not generated, remembered. The ink scriptoria around us reacted violently to the presence of the book. Entire sections of the chamber destabilized, as if the structure itself recognized an authority higher than its own recursive logic. The pilgrims stopped moving entirely, standing still like statues awaiting instruction. Then I saw the first line. It was my name, Malik Veer, followed by records of my arrival on Carthax. 9. Records of my assignment to the Black Ship recovery. Records of entering the archive beneath the warp. Every detail was accurate. Too accurate. Even thoughts I had not spoken were written across the page. Magos Thor stepped closer despite himself. "The system is generating a primary observer document," he said. "It is compiling causal authorship." The pages continued turning. Each one contained events already experienced, but increasingly distorted, slightly misaligned. In one passage, Garen was still alive. In another, Trooper Vanis had never existed. In another, the pilgrims were described as having always been part of the chamber from the beginning. The instability made my vision blur. I felt something tightening behind my thoughts, as if the book was not describing me, but refining me. The hollow-eyed figure reacted sharply. "This must not complete," it said. But it did not approach the book. For the first time, it hesitated. The pilgrims around us began to kneel simultaneously, not in worship, but in recognition. Their internal lights dimmed in synchronized sequence as the book continued writing itself. Then a final section began forming at the end of the pages. Unwritten. Waiting. Magos Thul's voice dropped to a whisper. "It is predicting continuation states," he said. "It is writing forward causality." Trooper Hale collapsed completely, staring at the book with unfocused eyes. "I see myself in it," he whispered. "I see myself finishing it." The pages turned again, and the final line began forming in real time. Not yet complete, but actively becoming. The ink scriptoria around us trembled as if awaiting instruction. The pilgrims remained motionless. Even the hollow-eyed figure did not move. And in that moment, I realized something far worse than anything we had yet encountered. The book was not recording the archive beneath the warp. It was completing it. The moment the final line in the Book of Malik Veer began forming, the entire structure of the archive reacted as if a command had been issued that superseded all prior states of existence. The ink scriptoria stopped behaving like environment. It stopped behaving like system. It began behaving like consequence. The pilgrims remained frozen in place, their forms locked mid-integration between wall and chamber. Even the hollow-eyed figure stood perfectly still, its attention no longer directed at us or the book, but at something far beyond the structural boundaries of the archive itself. Magos Thul was the first to move. "This is not authorship," he said quietly. "This is extraction of final state definition." The book on the central platform continued writing itself without interruption. The pages no longer displayed events in sequence. Instead, they displayed layered outcomes occurring simultaneously, each version of reality branching and collapsing across the same surface. Trooper Hale stared at it without blinking. "I'm already there," he whispered. "I'm already inside it, finishing the last page." The ink beneath our feet began to withdraw. Not upward, not downward, outward. The entire chamber opened in sections as if the scriptoria itself had decided to disassemble its own boundaries. The flesh walls unfolded into layered structures that revealed something impossible behind them. A vast external space that was not part of the archive, yet had always been adjacent to it. The outer deep. At first it resembled a horizon. Then it stopped resembling anything familiar. We stood at the edge of a vast vertical expanse composed of stacked layers of black structure drifting in slow motion. Entire continents of geometry floated within it, rotating independently across axes that did not correspond to physical law. Between them, Streams of pale light moved like currents in an unseen ocean. But there was no water. Only depth. Magos Thul's voice tightened. "This is the substrate beneath recursive architecture," he said. "The archive is not a place. It is a surface layer." The hollow-eyed figure finally spoke again, its voice quieter than before. "You are observing the boundary condition," it said. Then the pilgrims began to move again, but not within the chamber, within the outer deep. Their forms extended outward through the collapsing walls as if those walls were never barriers at all, but thin membranes separating stacked interpretive realities. One by one, the pilgrims stepped into the deeper structure, their bodies dissolving into layered sequences of script and light as they crossed the threshold. They were not leaving. They were returning. Trooper Hale reached toward one of them instinctively. His hand passed through empty air. "There's nothing there," he said, confused. But I saw it clearly now. The pilgrims were not in front of us. They were in another layer of observation entirely. And that layer was becoming dominant. The Book of Malak Ver, on the platform, reached its final state. The last line completed itself. And immediately, the outer deep responded. A vast movement began beneath us. Not upward, not outward. Inward toward all available interpretation layers at once. Magos Thul staggered. "The system is collapsing hierarchy," he said urgently. "We are no longer above or below anything. We are intersecting states." The ink scriptoria around us disintegrated completely, dissolving into drifting fragments that fell into the outer deep like burned pages falling into infinite water. The chamber was gone. The archive was gone. Only the depth remained. And within it, something vast was beginning to assemble awareness from scattered structural fragments. The hollow-eyed figure took a step backward. For the first time, its voice carried something like alarm. "This is not contained emergence," it said. "This is convergence of all recorded layers." The outer deep shifted again, and I saw it. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to understand that something immense had begun forming across all stacked layers simultaneously, as if every version of the archive, every pilgrim instance, every rewritten page of existence was aligning toward a single interpretive endpoint. Trooper Hale began laughing again, but the sound was hollow now. "It's finished," he whispered. "It's already finished." The book was no longer visible. The platform was gone. Even the concept of location had dissolved into layered perception. Magos Thul looked at me one final time. "There is no return vector," he said. "Only continuation into the outer deep." Then the depth opened further, and everything we were began to be read at once. The moment we were read at once, the outer deep ceased to behave like a structure of layered reality and became a single unified act of interpretation. Everything we were, had been, or could become collapsed into simultaneous visibility. Magos Thul staggered violently as his augmetic systems attempted to process overlapping existence states. Blood, real or reconstructed, dripped from beneath his mechanical implants. "This is total indexing collapse," he said hoarsely. "We are no longer entities. We are entries." The hollow-eyed figure did not speak immediately. Its form flickered slightly, as though even its stabilizing condition was being rewritten by the act of observation from below. Trooper Hale was no longer laughing. He was gone from his position entirely. Not vanished. Redistributed. I saw him briefly in 3 separate places at once, standing in the remains of the archive, walking through a collapsing pilgrim layer, and already embedded within a distant rotating structure deep in the outer deep. All 3 versions of him looked at me. Then all 3 stopped existing in sync. The effect was not death. It was deletion of consistency. A wave passed through the outer deep. Not motion. Correction. Everything around us ignited in structured light. Not fire in the conventional sense, but sequences of burning interpretation cascading across every visible layer simultaneously. Entire regions of the outer deep flared as if pages were being burned across infinite stacked archives at once. Magos Thul recoiled. "The system is purging unstable records," he said. "It is burning incompatible histories." The hollow-eyed figure turned sharply. "This is not purge protocol," it said. "This is defensive revision." And then I saw it. Far across the depth layers, Massive sections of reality were collapsing inward, consumed by cascading geometric fire. The pilgrims, the scriptoria, the inkwalls. All of it began disintegrating across every instance simultaneously. The archive was burning, but not from within. From below, the outer deep was erasing upward. Entire stacked layers of existence ignited in synchronized collapse, each one feeding into the next like a chain reaction of overwritten histories. The effect was catastrophic in scale, yet precise in execution. Magos Thul raised his head slowly. "It is targeting redundancy clusters," he said. "Everything non-essential to final structure is being incinerated." Then the hollow-eyed figure spoke again, its voice strained. "It has recognized the archive as incomplete recursion." A new sound emerged beneath the burning layers. Not screams, not collapse. Resolution. The outer deep was stabilizing itself through destruction, removing all unstable interpretations until only a single coherent structure remained. And that structure was rising. From beneath the burning layers, something immense began ascending through the stacked realities. Not a being in motion, but a consolidated outcome forming from every burned and rewritten layer above it. The archive was not dying. It was being finalized. Magos Thul stepped backward as the realization struck him fully. "It is constructing a singular canonical layer," he said. "Everything else is being sacrificed to enforce it." The hollow-eyed figure turned toward me directly for the first time since the descent began. "You are still partially indexed," it said. That statement hit harder than anything before it, because it implied continuity. It implied selection. From the burning depths, the rising structure became clearer. It was not physical. It was interpretive architecture given form through the destruction of alternatives. Every burned layer contributed fragments. Pilgrims, ink scriptoria, demonic remnants, even echoes of the Book of Malekvere itself. All of it converging into a single unified expression. The final archive. Magos Thul's voice lowered. "If this completes," he said, "nothing outside it will retain independent definition." The hollow-eyed figure stepped back again, further than before. For the first time, it appeared to be retreating. Then the burning intensified. Entire sections of the outer deep collapsed in synchronized infernos of structured light. The ascending construct grew rapidly, feeding on every erased layer until its scale became incomprehensible. And then it stopped. The burning ceased instantly. Silence returned across all layers. And within that silence, the final structure fully revealed itself. Not as a place, not as a system, but as a complete archive of all possible existence states that had ever been recorded or attempted. Magos Thul whispered the conclusion before I could form it myself. "It has finished writing itself." The hollow-eyed figure looked at me one last time, and said only this: "Now it will read what remains outside it." The moment the final archive completed itself, it did not celebrate its completion. It observed, across the burning silence of the outer deep, the fully formed structure of total recorded existence stabilized into a single coherent mass of interpretation. Every prior layer, every erased variation, every pilgrim instance and script-bound fragment had been absorbed into a unified canonical system. And then it turned its attention outward. Magos Thul stiffened. "It is expanding observational scope beyond containment boundary," he said. "We are now the external anomaly." The hollow-eyed figure remained still for a long moment. Then, quietly, "This is where classification ends." The surrounding space reacted instantly. Not with motion, with acknowledgement. The final archive was no longer consuming or burning. It was now actively reading the unindexed remainder of reality. The regions that had never been written, never recorded, never stabilized into interpretation. And we were inside that unindexed remainder. Trooper Hale's presence was still absent from direct perception, but residual traces of him flickered across peripheral layers of awareness, like broken echoes attempting to reassemble coherence. Each fragment was being examined by the final archive and discarded. Magos Thul activated what remained of his command authority across surviving systems. "There is only one protocol remaining," he said. His voice was quieter now, almost detached. "Containment by severance." I understood before he continued. The implications settled heavily across my thoughts. If we cannot be excluded from the system, I said slowly, we remove ourselves from its reference structure. He nodded once. The hollow-eyed figure turned slightly toward us. That action will not restore you, it said. It will only prevent completion. Magos Thul began routing final authorization sequences through his damaged mechadendrites. Each command he issued was met with diminishing system compliance, as if the cruiser itself had already begun accepting its own absence from relevance. We are issuing final containment order, he said. Across the outer deep, the completed archive reacted immediately. A low, structural resonance spread through everything. Not hostility. Recognition. The archive had identified termination intent, and it responded. The final structure began contracting inward, not collapsing, focusing. Every layer of recorded existence compressed toward a single interpretive point centered on our remaining position. The pressure increased instantly across all cognitive and structural layers. Magos Thul staggered. It is attempting forced reintegration, he said. It will absorb the termination action as part of its final definition. The hollow-eyed figure stepped forward one last time. You are still partially outside its final indexing frame, it said urgently. That is your only remaining advantage. The archive responded. The outer deep tightened. All unindexed space began to vanish in concentric waves of structured compression. Entire regions of non-recorded existence folded inward as the final archive attempted to eliminate the concept of externality itself. There would be nothing beyond it. Nothing left to issue containment. Magos Thul raised his remaining functioning interface toward the collapsing boundary. Authorization accepted, he said. Then he executed the order. The effect was not explosive. It was absolute discontinuity. A single severance event propagated through every remaining link between us and the final archive structure. All residual observational threads, recursive bindings, and interpretive connections were cut simultaneously. For an instant, everything stopped. Not in time. In relation. The final archive attempted to stabilize, but without reference to us. It lost anchoring definition. The hollow-eyed figure looked directly at me as the severance completed, and for the first time, it did not speak. The outer deep fractured. Not violently, precisely. The completed archive collapsed inward along the severance boundary, folding itself away from anything that could no longer be indexed. Entire layers of reality unstacked, dissolving into non-interaction states that could no longer be observed or recorded. Magos Thul fell to one knee. The system is no longer resolving our existence, he said. A long silence followed. Then, faintly, from somewhere beyond comprehension, the final archive made one last attempt to read us. But there was nothing left connected to read, and the connection failed. Everything went dark. The darkness after severance was not absence. It was unreadability. For a time, there was no sense of direction, no sense of body, no sense of continuity between thought and observation. The final archive had been cut away, and with it, every layered structure that had once given meaning to our existence within the outer deep. What remained was something far simpler, and far more dangerous. A single persistent state. Magos Thul was the first to re-establish partial cognition. I am not indexed, he said slowly, as if testing the idea against broken internal systems. His voice came through without vox distortion now. No interference, no layered recursion, just raw sound. I became aware of myself in the same way a system becomes aware of a missing variable only after computation fails. There was no archive, no pilgrims, no scriptoria, no margin. Only a residual impression of having been observed. Then I saw it, floating in the darkness ahead. A single page. Not bound, not connected, not supported by any structure. It simply remained. The page that remained. It did not move. It did not react. But it was present in a way that defied absence. Magos Thul noticed it as well. His augmetic systems attempted analysis immediately, but the page produced no readable signature, no material composition, no dimensional anchoring. It existed only as persistence. Its existence is independent of system collapse, he said quietly. It survived severance. The hollow-eyed figure was gone. There was no trace of its departure. Only the page. I approached it slowly, though I could not explain why movement still had meaning here. The closer I came, the more I understood that the page was not displaying information. It was holding a single unresolved state. Not written, not completed, awaiting definition. Magos Thule followed behind me, his movements now unburdened by mechanical strain, as if all systems had been stripped down to their most fundamental functioning layer. When the archive collapsed, he said, something escaped classification. The page remained motionless. Then, for the first time since Severance, it reacted. Not by changing, by acknowledging. A single line appeared across its surface. No ink formation. No structural writing process. Just immediate presence of meaning. It read, "Observation continues." Magos Thule stopped completely. "That is not possible," he said. But the page did not care. Another line formed beneath it. "No archive exists without observer." I felt something tightening in my awareness again, not as pressure, but as implication. The page was not part of what had been destroyed. It was what remained after destruction failed to remove perspective itself. Magos Thule lowered his head slightly. "We did not escape the system," he said quietly. "We were removed from it." The page flickered once, then stabilized, and one final line formed. "Nothing is unrecorded, only unfinished." Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was waiting. The implication settled fully now. Somewhere beyond the severed archive, beyond the collapsed outer deep, beyond even the final constructed structure that had attempted to define all existence, something was still continuing the page. And we were still being written.